All right, and like Shakabo said, here we go, go, go. All right. Yeah, I'm dedicating this week to sexual reproduction among marine creatures. That's the only thing that I mean, nothing else. Or at least I will as soon as I let one more person in. Have to, oh, here we go. All right, one more person let in. Okay, not seeing anything on the chat that requires my immediate attention. So, as we continue, talking about how sexual reproduction works, and in some ways, it can be quite different when you're living completely surrounded by water. And it starts by looking at the cells that organisms use to do it with. That's gametes. This is, of course, egg and sperm, or at least it is in species in which one species produces large gametes and the other one produces smaller ones. This is certainly true of animals, all of them that I know, very much true of plants. It's not necessarily true for fungi and for many seaweeds, for example, but species in which one, this is a misprint in the slide, in which one gender, one sex produces larger gametes and one produces small ones are said to be anisogamous. The larger gametes, the egg, and the small ones, the sperm. The female is the one that produces the large gametes. The male is the one that produces the small gametes. Other than that, there's no universal means of sex determination. In mammals, and all mammals as far as I know, sex is chromosomally determined. You are familiar with this from humans, how, there are some things that don't perfectly fit the pattern, but by and large, if you have two X chromosomes, you end up as female, an X and a Y, and you end up as male. In birds, it's actually the opposite, and they use letters W, Z. So if you are WW, you're a male, and a WZ is a female. For many reptiles, sea turtles, for example, sex is determined by the temperature at which the egg is incubated, and it's not determined by karyotype at all. In some insects, if you're haploid, you have one copy of each chromosome, you're male, and if you have two, you're a female. Sex determination may or may not have anything to do with chromosomes. And as we'll see, quite a lot of critters, including a lot of marine critters, may actually change sex during their lifespan or actually produce gametes of both types. We'll talk about that in a bit. Isogamous species, all the gametes are the same size. There's no distinction between egg and sperm. They're just haploid cells, and two of them fuse together to make a diploid cell. There may be, as far as I know, there always are different mating types that are determined by receptors on gametes. This is not marine, but in fungi, you might have plus and minus mating types, or in yeast, it's usually called type A and type alpha. And so two type A's can't reproduce and two type alphas can't reproduce. You have to have an A and an alpha, but you can't tell the difference just by looking. They look outwardly identical. The difference is solely in some kind of receptor proteins on the gametes' outsides. So just by way of example, this happens to be the life cycle of an Alaskan green seaweed. Isogametes in that top diagram, they are listed on the right-hand side of that diagram. They may fuse to form a zygote cyst, or they may transform into haploid individuals and become parthenogametes, which is shown over there on the left. So in this species, sometimes the gametes might simply transform into haploid plants. In other generation, but all of the gametes are the same size, they look the same, there's no clear distinction. And I just heard something go ding, so give me a moment. Okay, sorry, checking to see if there's anything I need here, if there's anybody I need to add. Okay, nothing urgent on the chat. Right. Okay. Many marine invertebrates are simply free spawners. Eggs and sperm are simply released into the water to find each other. If you are one of these barrel sponges, for example, sponges can't really move. There's at least one sponge that is capable of moving at the rollicking pace of 4 millimeters per day, but that hardly counts. So if you're a sponge, you're pretty much stuck there. So you pretty much have to fire off huge numbers of eggs or sperm and take your chances on eggs and sperm finding each other. In some species, free spawners may be single sex. Oysters, for example, do this a lot, and they're male or they're female. Or spawning adults might be hermaphroditic, meaning capable of producing either eggs or sperm, or sometimes both. Let me put that another way. Some organisms that are hermaphroditic will spend part of their lives producing eggs and then switch, or part producing sperm and then switch. Others might be simultaneously able to produce eggs or sperm. That's the difference between sequential and simultaneous hermaphrodites, and we'll talk about that in a bit. The problems with free spawning is that, especially in turbulent water, gametes are just scattered in all directions, and the odds of an egg and a sperm finding each other might end up being pretty low. If the odds are low, then you have to make up for it by producing huge numbers of gametes, which explains why female oysters might crank out, 100 million eggs in a season, with the males putting out a like number of sperm. Right? If the odds of any one egg getting fertilized are very low, you've got to produce as many as you can and hope that a couple will make it. There's also the problem of timing. If you release all of your eggs and nobody around you has got the message and has released their sperm, then you've just wasted a great deal of effort for nothing. So egg and sperm release has to be carefully timed. Often this is to an environmental cue. Oysters use the tides, for example. There's a risk of interspecific fertilization, which means that if you have several species spawning at the same time, then sometimes gametes of two different species may end up fusing. And in that case, they generally don't yield offspring. There's also a problem I've seen in lab. If the gametes are too concentrated, there's a risk of what's called polyspermy. If two or more sperm happen to fertilize the same egg at the same time. In my invertebrate zoology class, we do a lab where I extract egg and sperm from sea urchins and fertilize the eggs. And you have to dilute the sperm a lot, because if you don't, each egg basically gets kamikazed by massive hordes of sperm. And the egg has ways that once the first sperm has penetrated the cell membrane, it can block any more sperm from coming in. But those eggs' defenses can be overwhelmed if you just add too many sperm. And the end result is that the embryos develop weird and don't survive for very long. So you need to have enough sperm to fertilize as many eggs as possible, but not so many that the eggs get completely overwhelmed and you end up with abnormal larvae that can't survive. You can increase the probability of egg-sperm encounters by boosting microscale turbulence. We talked about laminar flow last week, and that's the idea that at low speed and or small spatial scale, flow of fluids is very smooth. You're at a very low Reynolds number. Viscosity predominates over inertia, and streamlines are very parallel, and there's not a great deal of turbulence. And in that case, it may actually be harder for a sperm to find an egg. So you need something, preferably, to make that water just a little bit more turbulent, not so much that the egg is thrown away, but turbulent enough that it mingle. Turbulent enough that there's a chance that the sperm can be brought closer to the egg. So here's a case study of how this works. The maps that you're looking at show the ranges of 4 different species of abalone. Abalone are a rock-dwelling snail. The shells can get quite large, up to, I want to say, about 8 inches or longer, maybe even a foot. The shell is coiled, but it's very low and very broad, as you would expect for organisms that live clinging to rocks. And as you can see, their ranges overlap in Southern California and the northern Baja California peninsula to the south, that long peninsula that's part of Mexico. They're esteemed as a gourmet delicacy, by the way, because their bodies have a great deal of muscle in them, as you'd expect from a critter that spends its life clinging to a rock. I can't say I've ever had abalone. My mother had it once and compared it to eating fillet of tire. Apparently, you have to pound it a lot to get it to taste good, but it is commercially fished as a delicacy. Anyway, these 4 species of abalone, black, pink, white, and green, all spawn at about the same time, and they're all triggered by the same cues. But hybridization between species is rare because there are sperm proteins called lysine that have to bind to egg protein receptors called virials, vitelline envelope receptors for lysine. Over there, A and C, you've got diagrams of sperm proteins that match the egg receptors. B, you don't, and when you don't, the sperm is not going to be able to penetrate into the egg. So there are various biochemical ways that egg and sperm have of recognizing each other, and that's very favorable. You need something like that in free-spawning species, possibly not so much in species that reproduce by internal fertilization, where the egg is not going to be potentially fertilized by multiple species of sperm all swimming around at once. Right. In a species where you've got separate sexes, we call that being gonochoristic. Hermaphrodites produce gametes of both sexes over the course of a lifetime. And some species may be simultaneous hermaphrodites, which means they produce both eggs and sperm at the same time. Sequential hermaphrodites, an individual begins as one sex and then changes to the other. And there are 2 forms that can take, protandry and protogyny. Individuals start as males and then become females, that's protandry, or individuals starting as females and later becoming males, that's protogyny. And you get all of these. You especially seem to get these strategies in fish a lot. There's a surprising number of fish that are, in fact, hermaphroditic. One example of a simultaneous hermaphrodite is a Caribbean reef fish called the butter hamlet. That's what it looks like. And 2 fish, when they like each other, will just get together and repeatedly switch between producing eggs and producing sperm over the course of mating, which I am told can take several days. Usually, even in simultaneous hermaphrodites, I might add, there's some kind of mechanism to ensure that hermaphrodites don't self-fertilize. And I assume this repeated switching of sex roles is meant to ensure that, to make sure that, you know, whichever fish is producing the eggs, they're being fertilized by the other fish's sperm. As we'll see, self-fertilization, well, it's a form of very close inbreeding, and in the long run, it's not selected for. It's not a good strategy. Here's protandry for you. This is a snail, albeit with a very low cap-shaped shell. There's not much of a coil to it. When you take the animal out and turn the shell upside down, it looks a bit like a slipper. So this is commonly called the Atlantic slipper limpet, Crepidula fornicata. And it's called fornicata for a reason. It lives in stacks. The largest individual on the bottom right there is a mature female, and she produces eggs. The individuals up on top are males, and you can't see this in this picture, but they've got very long, extensible penises that reach down and fertilize the eggs of the big female on the bottom. If a female dies, the lowest male starts reabsorbing his testes and reabsorbing his penis and sprouting ovaries and transitions into a female. So juveniles will start at the top of the stack. You can just see a juvenile shell kind of at the far right. I'm counting 5 in this stack. The 5th one, though, kind of blends into the 4th very well. But once that one matures, he'll function as a male, and he'll periodically fertilize the big female's eggs, the one on the bottom. And if the female dies or if the stack gets separated, the lowest male will become the female. So everybody will start on the top of the stack and end up on the bottom of the stack. You know, kind of a rather strange way to live, but it works. I think the second one may also be a female, although I can't really tell from here, but you may have more than one female in a stack, but you get males on top, females on the bottom, and there's often some undecideds in the middle of the stack. Another fun example, protandry. This is my beef with Finding Nemo. Clownfish, of course, live near sea anemones in groups, and there'll be one mature male, one mature female, and some immature males. The immature males, by the way, are not the offspring of the mature male and the mature female. Baby clownfish leave their sea anemones and try to find others. So the immature males are not related to the mature couple. If the female is removed, the mature male will change sex to female, and the next largest male will become sexually mature. And this is the beef that I have with Finding Nemo. They really should have made it so that, right, if you remember at the start of the movie, Marlin and I think his wife's name is, it's not Pearl. I can't think of his wife's name, but they're moving into a new sea anemone that looks beautiful. They're raising eggs, and then she gets killed. And the only survivors are Marlin, the male, and Nemo, their offspring. What should be happening in that movie is that Marlin should be trying to raise Nemo while negotiating the fact that he is in the process of transitioning to Marlena. So he's supposed to be turning into a female while that movie is going on. And I think this would make a much more interesting movie. I mean, you know, this is the kind of thing that modern families sometimes have to cope with. It's, you know, something that's very much in the news, and I think it would make for a much more timely movie. You know, if you saw Marlin's angst because he's not only searching for Nemo, he's also trying to deal with feelings that he's never really experienced before. I don't know why Pixar does not give me a consulting job. My fees would be quite reasonable. Anyway, clownfish are a great example of protandry. If you want protogyny, here are some California sheephead wrasses. In the background, you might be able to see all of that dark leafy stuff. That is kelp, these seaweeds that can grow up to 100 feet long and form these groves on the ocean floor, these kelp forests. And California sheephead wrasses begin as females. There's one on the left. She's the one that's kind of salmon pink. After between 4 and 9 years, they switch to males. And you can tell the males because they develop those black bands on the head and the tail. So you've got a male over there at the right. Simultaneous hermaphroditism makes sense. All of these strategies make sense. There's an evolutionary rationale for every one of them. Neither one is especially the right or the wrong way to live. They're just, things that work in the environments that we're looking at. And you find simultaneous hermaphroditism fairly often when individuals can't find each other easily. If you want a non-marine example, earthworms are simultaneous hermaphrodites, and it's not that easy to find a mate when you're spending your entire life burrowing through the soil completely blind. And it's also not that easy to find a mate if you are a deep sea fish, like this tripod fish, Bathopterois grallator. This particular one is a simultaneous hermaphrodite. And, if you can't search for a mate, or if mates are very hard to find, then simultaneous hermaphroditism ensures that any two individuals can reproduce. You can reproduce with any other member of your species. There's no concern about the fact that that member of your species might be the same sex as you, because you can, because you are functionally a member of both sexes. So you find that a lot. What about sequential? A model that was worked out by Gieselin in San Francisco points this out. To produce eggs costs more energy than producing sperm. That's very much obvious in critters with very large eggs. Think about it. A chicken egg is, 2 inches long, and a chicken sperm is, maybe 20 microns long. It's not significantly bigger or smaller than, any sperm. And it takes a great deal more metabolic energy to produce that egg, not just because the egg is larger, but because eggs very often contain yolk. They contain energy for the developing embryo. So producing eggs costs more, and the amount of energy that you've got is a function of body size. So the idea is that if you are a small individual, you can produce more sperm than you can produce eggs. Eggs cost you a great deal. You won't be able to make very many, but your odds of reproducing are better if you concentrate on sperm. If you make the smaller, simpler gamete. And the idea is that if the more gametes you produce, the greater your odds of reproducing. So you'll have better luck if you're small and male than if you're small and female. Once you get large, once you've built up energy resources and built up large size, now you're capable of producing more eggs. And right at the point where those lines cross, that's the idea that once you exceed a certain size, it becomes more advantageous to be female than be male. Now you've got the resources to start cranking out eggs. And And so being female above that size maximizes your potential. This is Gieselin's size advantage model, predicting that the conditions under which protandry is going to be favored. You might think protogyny wouldn't be favored, but it seems to work in species like the California wrasse, because in that species, large males are favored because they're territorial. Males defend territories, and each male has to defend a, quote, harem of several females that the male will mate with. Males are constantly challenging each other, and if you are a small male, you're not going to get to mate at all. You're just going to get sand kicked in your face, or whatever the equivalent is in a kelp forest. So a small male, can produce all the sperm he wants to, but he's not going to mate at all. And in a species like this, your chances of reproducing are better if you produce eggs when you're small, and then wait to build up your body size and grow large, and do those Charles Atlas exercises and build up those muscles to challenge the bully on the beach, and then switch over to being male. So in this circumstance, if you're small, it's better to be female, because a small male won't get to mate at all. A small female will still get to reproduce. And when that small female gets large, she can become a male and mate with multiple females and produce the largest number of offspring that way. So these different strategies all make sense. Each one is advantageous in different circumstances. As we will see, I don't think we're going to get to it until Wednesday, but there are all kinds of variations that you can play on this game, and cases where you have not simply one type of male, but two or more that use very different strategies to try to fertilize the female's eggs. But we'll get to that. All right. One of the things Darwin pointed out, and he was one of the first to notice this, is a phenomenon called sexual selection. And that takes two forms, intrasexual and intersexual. In intrasexual selection, competition happens among members of one sex for the opportunity to mate with the other sex. In intersexual selection, members of one sex select mates on the basis of traits that they have. That would be mate selection. So if we're talking about familiar landlocked examples, deer, male deer, fighting by locking their horns and pushing each other would be an example of intrasexual selection. Intersexual selection might be female birds, let's say, choosing to mate with males that are the most brilliantly colored or that sing the loudest and prettiest song or something like that. So both of these can be seen. A rather extreme example of intrasexual selection is seen in northern elephant seals. Be very glad you are not a northern elephant seal, because it's 1,000 times worse than gym class in high school. 90% of the males don't get to mate at all. The males that do get to mate are the largest and the strongest, and each reproducing male maintains a harem of dozens of females that he and only he will mate with. This means that there is a hell of a lot of competition between males, because if you're a male, you are very likely not to get to mate at all, but you're going to try to at any chance that you can. So it's very common for a male to try to sneak a copulation with somebody else's female, and this is met by extreme violence. Bear in mind that elephant seals can weigh up to something like 2,000 pounds, at least the males can. So this is a fight between elephant seals they're bashing into each other and injuring each other severely just with the sheer inertia and gashing each other with their teeth. And you can see that both of them are really badly scarred on the neck. That skin right there is extremely tough and thick, but still male-male competition is frequently lethal. Think about it. If you're a male and you don't compete, you will never pass your genes on. If you're a male and you do compete, you might get killed, but the odds that you will get to reproduce are still better under this particular sex ratio. The odds that you will successfully reproduce are still better than they would be if you didn't fight. So males who fight to the death, even though it may kill them both. But males that fight to the death, on average, will still get to pass their genes on more than males that run away from a fight. So sexual selection in this particular species is favoring lethal male-male competition. When the stakes aren't quite that high, selection often favors methods of competition that are not lethal and that often look, quote, ritualized. Deer butting at each other with their antlers usually don't kill each other. They might hurt each other somewhat, but it's not necessarily fatal. And here's a marine example. These are male fiddler crabs. And I've always liked these guys because the genus name for the commonest fiddler crabs in the United States is genus Euca, spelled UCA. So yeah, UCA spells the common genus of fiddler crabs. And if I ever have $50 million that I'm not doing anything better with, I'm going to donate it to the athletic department on the grounds that on the condition that they change our mascot from the bears to the fiddler crabs. It'd be the Euca fiddler crabs. And I think this would be terrific. We could sell like styrofoam crab claws, and instead of doing the tomahawk chop, we could do the crab chop or the crab pinch or something like that. And that's what these crabs are doing, waving around their giant yellow specialized claws. Sometimes they'll make noise by tapping on the big claw with the smaller claw, which is why they're called fiddler crabs, incidentally. Somebody who was evidently on drugs thought it looked like they were playing a fiddle. And in this species, they'll just wave their claws in each other's faces, and the loser will eventually back off, and nobody gets killed. This is a species that doesn't have this kind of harem behavior. And in this species, if you compete and you lose, you still have a chance of growing bigger and living to fight another day. The stakes are not nearly that high, and you'll get another chance later if you back off. So in this species, if you fight and run away, you have a better chance of living long enough to reproduce than if you try to fight lethally. So selection in fiddler crabs favors less lethal forms of competition, features, coming out, waving your big claws around, and eventually somebody gets the idea to back off. Sorry, all I can think of is legions of UCA sports fans waving giant styrofoam crab claws. Except we can't call it the tomahawk chop. It would have to be the, I don't know, the crab chop. I don't know. It's late. I'm tired. Okay, right. That would actually seem to be it for right now. But on Wednesday, I want to talk about what happens when gender gets bent, because within this constraint of sexual selection, you'll find that evolution has favored a rather surprising number of different strategies that organisms may have evolved to adopt. Some of them would be illegal in the state of North Carolina, but we will talk about that in good time. And I will go ahead and stop the recording.